The last US military plane left Afghanistan late Monday evening, marking the end to America's forever war, 20 years of battling terrorism and nation-building in the country. State Secretary Antony Blinken said that this marks a new chapter of US engagement and diplomacy in the region, noting that Washington has also suspended its diplomatic presence in Kabul and transferred operations to Doha, Qatar. While the Biden administration now looks to the future, for Afghans, it's a return to the country's past, characterised as the graveyard of empires, as the messy withdrawal of US and NATO forces leaves the country with a broken government, the Taliban precariously in charge, and instability, division and violence in society at large. What lies ahead for the embattled country, and how will the US engage with it? It's uncertain, but for clues we turn to Ambassador Hugo LLORENS, who recently retired from nearly 4 decades of diplomatic service for America. He was the US Assistant Chief of Mission in Afghanistan from 2012 to 2013 and headed America's diplomatic missions in Kabul from 2016 to 2017. Very warm welcome to you, sir. Thank you so much for joining us. How are you today?
Good. Great to be with you.
Thank you. It's an honour to have you on our programme. And while in the last couple of hours, we've seen your country, your president just wrap up the end of America's 20-year war in Afghanistan. And while on Monday evening, the last of American forces departed Afghanistan, was the last few weeks the sort of departure that you envisioned back during your time in Kabul 4 years ago?
No, I never expected that this would happen. My view is that President Biden made a decision on April 14, and the reason you and I are having that conversation today is based on the fact that he made that decision, which had catastrophic consequences. It led to the very quick collapse of a pro-Western government, of a pro-US government, a government that was engaged in the fight against terrorism. It created a very significant humanitarian tragedy, hundreds of thousands of people homeless, thousands killed and wounded. So it's been a pretty horrible situation. The consequences of this decision and the rapid collapse, and we all, I think, acknowledge that the collapse happened much faster than anyone anticipated. Although I always believed it would have been inevitable that once the US precipitously pulled out its troops, the chances for the Afghans to fight alone without the air cover, without the support of the US and NATO special forces was going to be very difficult for them. But it happened sooner. And there will be consequences. There will be consequences with regards to our security. And there will be consequences with regards to geopolitics, to how our potential enemies perceive the pledges that the United States makes to its friends and allies.
And while the recent terror attack near the Kabul airport, it was a terrible tragedy and it had a massive psychological impact. What did this attack signify to you? I mean, is this the beginning of the violence that is to come to the region?
Well, again, I don't know, but I think that the first point is that I disagree with the president's decision to withdraw from Afghanistan. We didn't have to do this. This did not have to end like this. We had a very small force in Afghanistan, ground force of special forces, advisors, some NATO counterparts, and a small air contingent that was supporting the Afghan security forces who were in the lead. And we could have maintained what would have been essentially a military stalemate for an indefinite period of time at a very sustainable level from a blood and treasure perspective. So this did not have to happen. Now, once you made the decision to withdraw, as we have all seen, that was also very badly handled. The withdrawal of the forces happened too quickly. We left our citizens behind. We left our Afghan allies behind. And then the president had to bring back the US military. Our allies came back. And we put ourselves in a very undefended place, which is an international airport. We should have kept Yes.
And you called for the Biden administration to reconsider its decision to end close air support for Afghan forces by August 31st, which of course now has passed, in order to prevent the situation from further spiraling. But obviously the advice has gone unheeded. Well, why is air support particularly critical, and is there still room for some kind of corrective action to stabilize the country?
Look, I think right now what's been done is done. The United States has been defeated by the Taliban, the United States and its allies. We were not physically, militarily defeated, but war is a test of wills, and we gave up. We walked away. So the Taliban is in control, and we need to deal with them. That is the reality. So as Secretary Blinken said, we need to engage with our diplomacy. Well, the first thing we need to do is work closely with our allies. And we need to insist that the Taliban allow safe passage to any remaining coalition citizens and those Afghans who worked for our militaries and our embassies. That is probably the first condition that we need to put on the Taliban. But then beyond that is insisting that they create a more inclusive government that brings in all of the ethnic groups, all of the tribal interests, a government that respects the rights of its citizens, particularly the rights of women. There have been very major gains in terms of women's empowerment in Afghanistan in the last 20 years. We want to make sure those gains are preserved. And we also want to make sure that the Taliban is not harboring terrorists. And I think all of us in the international community will judge the Taliban very harshly if they continue to protect Al-Qaeda and other terrorist groups. Now, if the Taliban cooperates, we want to engage them and we want to work with them. And we need to advance our interests. But I would say that it's a very difficult situation because prior to that, we had an allied government, a pro-Western government. Now, these were our former enemies, and it's going to be very complex.
And well, with the withdrawal of the United States and NATO forces, some speculate that the Taliban and ISIS-K are going to fight very fiercely and that Afghanistan will turn into a battleground, and there's the possibility of a civil war happening. And some speculate that the US and the Taliban might actually end up collaborating to be able to face all these other kind of threats in Afghanistan. What is your view on the possibility of civil war?
Look, it's a very complicated situation. The reality is right now the Taliban is firmly in control. There is only small areas like the province of Panjshir, which is about 130 kilometers to the north of Kabul. And the Panjshiris are still resisting. They're heavily armed. But right now, the Taliban seems to be in control. But there is a lot of resistance, particularly in urban areas, whether it's in Kabul or Mazar or the cities of Kandahar, Herat, Jalalabad. There's great resistance to the Taliban. So if they try to impose the old ways, as they ruled in 1996 to 2001, you could create an uprising, and the country could have civil conflict. And then there's the issue of ISIS-K. We always estimated that there were about 20 international terrorist groups operating in some of the ungoverned space in Afghanistan. And our fear is that a weak Taliban could result in these groups rising up. So it is a potentially very complicated situation.
And also, you've led US and allied forces in their fight against organised crime and terrorism in various parts of the world. And do you see the potential, how likely do you think it is for Afghanistan to revert back to the, basically the hotbed of terrorism that it once was?
Well, look, I think that if you looked at it in a very objective way right now, you would have to say that we're in a pre-September 11th situation. The Taliban's back in power. We're out of there. We have the United States and its allies are not in Afghanistan. We've lost that platform. the military platform, the basing platform, the intelligence platform. We had a huge intelligence presence. The US and allied intelligence services working with the Afghan intelligence. So we've lost all that. It's impossible to effectively combat terrorist groups from bases 1,000 miles away. Yes, you can conduct selective strikes, as we did pre-September 11, but you're really not going to be able to seriously disrupt the terrorist groups. So again, I think we're in a difficult position.
And while China and Russia, they appear to have some sort of understanding with the Taliban, having pledged their support in rebuilding Afghanistan. And it's no secret that they prefer to have the US withdraw from the country. And some see this as the US having lost Afghanistan. So as the Taliban creates a cabinet to really solidify its control over the country, shouldn't the US be more involved in this process? What kind of role do you think it should play?
Look, I think there's a role for the US to play. I would prefer that our role be in close collaboration with our allies, with our European allies, with Japan, with South Korea, with Australia, all of us together having a common position. But I would say that for China and Russia, despite our antagonism, they have similar interests with regards to Afghanistan. They want a stable Afghanistan in the end. They don't want international terrorists operating in Afghanistan that would potentially threaten China. China borders, as you know, Afghanistan. And also Russia has great interest in Afghanistan's neighbors in Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan. Russia has very close ties with them, and they fear a destabilization. So there are common interests between the West, the United States, and Russia and China.
And well, the Biden administration until now, there's not been, there doesn't seem to have been much of a concrete strategy or foresight in regards to the events that have unfolded in the past few weeks. And well, what kind of scenarios do you think the administration should really prepare for? I mean, President Biden, in a press briefing on Tuesday, he said that the US doesn't necessarily need to be on the ground to continue its fight against terrorism, but without the intelligence that you mentioned and also the Air Force, the Bagram Air Base that they had in the country, how are they going to counter these kinds of attacks?
I think the president is completely wrong. Again, I have a lot of respect for President Biden. I've known him since the days he was a senator in the 1990s. He's a very fine man. He has a lot of foreign policy experience. But on this issue, he's wrong. Again, remember, pre-September 11, we were conducting operations against al-Qaeda from afar, over the horizon, and it didn't succeed. Al-Qaeda was able to reconstitute from Africa to Afghanistan, and they knocked on our door very hard on September 11, 2001. That is what we learned. In the last 20 years, we have prevented Afghanistan being used as a platform or a base for terrorists to attack the United States and its allies. And that includes our European allies, our allies in East Asia. There have been no attack. So we've been successful. And again, right, what we had until very recently was a very small military and air presence, but it was very effective. And I think President Biden is sitting in a very difficult situation, because if in the future, terrorists are able to successfully attack the United States from Afghanistan and Europe, the policy would have been proven a total fiasco.
And well, what do you think he's going to do in the future? I mean, do you think he's going to maintain this no looking back approach?
Look, I don't see us going back to Afghanistan. I think we're out. And I think we're going to have to deal with the terrorist threat as best as we can, but from an unfavorable position, trying to gather intelligence from 1,000 miles away, trying to launch military strikes from 1,000 miles away. before we could get an aircraft on target from one of our bases, US and NATO bases, in 10, 15 minutes. We were there. We had the Afghan intelligence services were 15,000 intelligence officers, and they were in every one of Afghanistan's 34 provinces. Over those 20 years, we disrupted hundreds of terrorist cells all over Afghanistan. You may not have read it in the newspaper, but we did it.
And while this has now been compromised, it seems, and while as the US pulled out, there's been quite some questions among US allies on America's commitment to its military presence and its capability to respond to security threats worldwide. Should US allies then expect this similar policy of withdrawal as its endgame, or offshore balancing at best in going forward?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think US credibility has been damaged. It pains me to say that as an American, but our credibility has been undermined, and our enemies will take notice, whether our potential enemies, whether it's China, whether it's Russia, certainly the jihadists will be emboldened. Having said that, I think I want to reassure that I still believe that American commitments to Europe as part of our partnership with our NATO allies, as well as our commitment to our principal allies in the Asia Pacific, whether it's the Republic of Korea, whether it's Japan, whether it's Australia, Philippines. I do believe that our word, I would not test US will. Anyone should never test US will in terms of our willingness to fight to defend the Republic of Korea or Japan or Australia. I'm not concerned about that, but I do think it does undermine. It creates concerns, and that's just the way it is. I think President Biden, before he made the decision to withdraw our forces, he should have asked for our allies' opinion. He didn't really do that. He basically went and informed them that that's what we were doing, and most of them opposed the decision. But they respected the fact that the US was the leader of the coalition, and they had no choice but to abide by the president's decision.
And well, due to time, I'm afraid this is where we'll have to leave things. But Ambassador Hugo LLORENS, it was an honour to have you on our show. Thank you so much for your time and just for being with us today.
Thank you very much. It was great to be with you.
And to our viewers, as always, thank you very much for watching.